Welcome back to another episode of ROC Boys Football. It's never too early to talk about the 2023 college football season. The boys have been focusing on the NFL draft, but we're just kind of itching to talk a little 2023 college football, bringing you guys our way too early top 25 college football rankings. And we even tiered off these teams, kind of tiering them to the natty contenders, the college football playoff contenders, the dark horses, and then just your really solid top 25 teams, and then some teams to watch. Before we get into it, I just want to say thank you to you guys again. My brothers and I, favorite thing to do is talk college football, and especially with you guys in the comment section. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and then let me know what teams we are leaving out, what teams we are sleeping on, or teams that we are way too high on. Dylan is way too high on Clemson heading into this year. Dylan, let's start with our natty contenders. We got a top five: Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Bama, and USC. Let's start with some of those top teams here.
I mean, Georgia, until they stop dominating college football, like they're going to be one every year, no matter who they lose. And that's just how it's going to be, because they've unseated Alabama for that team where it's like, you got to prove to me that they're not the best team.
Yeah.
And then I think Michigan, Ohio State, I think obviously are very much in that next tier, just because the only team to really challenge Ohio or Georgia in a meaningful game. I know Mizzou played them kind of tough for a while, but that's different, the early regular season game. In Michigan, Ohio State are right kind of neck and neck with each other. So I think that's pretty fair to where they belong.
This is a really interesting Michigan team because you look at those top four teams: Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Bama. And we included USC because when you have Caleb Williams, when you have a difference maker of that magnitude at quarterback, like, you can win a national championship. But these other four teams: Georgia replacing a quarterback, Ohio State replacing a very good quarterback in CJ Stroud, and Bama replacing Bryce Young. The only quarterback, or the only team that's not necessarily going out and replacing a quarterback, is the Michigan Wolverines. So you take a look at a team that has a potential to break through and make it happen this year. I mean, I know, and many of you guys know we are Michigan fans, but this does seem to be a year that Michigan is bringing back almost all the important pieces from that 2022 team and their quarterback when other teams are not bringing it. This Michigan team could be something special.
Yeah, and even though we obviously I'm a Michigan fan, it's hard to say they won't. I mean, to get a guy like Corum back, to get the couple offensive linemen you probably wouldn't have thought they'd get back. Like,
I mean, they go 12 deep at offensive line.
And that's the thing. Everybody who needed to return this year to make them what I think they want to be, they ended up coming back. So it's hard to say, because Michigan obviously was very much there last year, barring one horrible game against TCU that threw 2 pick sixes. Really hard to win and doing that. But everything else, that's a good team.
The one interesting team, Ohio State, I mean, I get you lose CJ Stroud, but the amount of talent they're going to have around whatever quarterback ends up winning that starting spot is next level. They're going to have a very good – Ohio State might be the most talented team minus a quarterback in college football next year. And then Bama's probably the biggest question mark. I mean, they weren't very good last year. They lost 2 games. They didn't look the normal dominant Alabama team. And then they lose a ton of guys. Bryce Young, the best quarterback in the country. You don't really know what the wide receiver room is going to look like. And then losing guys like Brian Branch, Will Anderson, Henry To'oTo'o on the defense side of the ball. Alabama's going to be good.
Still in that mode where, again, it's like, yeah, they had a bad year last year, but they still won the Sugar Bowl. They're probably the 4th best team in the country, if I had to guess. I don't know that. It's hard to say that now, but
yeah, you don't know though.
Nick Saban was up there pounding the table for him, and as he should have been. But I get you don't know, but they've still earned the right, if you will, to be. They're a natty contender until again proven otherwise. They're not the favorite like Georgia.
This does seem to be the worst Alabama team preseason though. I mean, you just don't know what the deal is with quarterback. The wide receiver room has been bad It was bad last year, and then a couple of those guys transfer out. And then USC is a dark horse. If they can figure out the defense and I'm not even asking them to be a top 15 defense. Just be a top 50 defense. Be competitive on the defense side of the ball, because you look at what they're bringing back on the offense side of the ball to add Marshawn Lloyd in the backfield as a running back, and this team could be elite. on the offense side of the
And
ball.
that's like still super surprised they didn't fire Alex Grinch because he doesn't
Yeah, he's got to go, man.
for that job. But
He's
you're right. Like they can't waste this year with Caleb Williams because you got a guy who's like so special in terms of what he can do in it. Again, you're right. They don't need a great defense. I don't know why it would necessarily get that much better. They did add a couple guys in the portal, especially on the defensive line, but I don't know. It's hard, but with Caleb Williams, anything's possible. He is that good.
Exactly. Now, getting into our college football contenders, I really wanted to throw Florida State into a natty contender because I think this is the year they win the ACC. And this was a really good, and I was banging the table for this Florida State team. They were really banged up in the middle of the year, and they kind of ran into some really tough teams in Wake Forest and NC State. And they ended up in Clemson. And so they lost all those 3 games. They hit a bye week. They get healthy, and then they just tear up the rest of the schedule. And they return pretty much every single important player from this team. Like, you look at the guys who are departing. Jamie Robinson at safety is solid, and what do I have in my notes? Robert Cooper on the defensive line. Like, that's about the only 2 starting caliber players they lose. They've killed the transfer portal, bringing in guys like Fentrell Cypress, Jeremiah Bowers. They have the true freshman Hakeem Williams coming in as well. Brandon Fisk out of the defensive line. This team was really good last year. I think they were a bona fide top 10 team. They returned their quarterback in Jordan Travis, who, I mean, every single year he's played college football, he's gotten noticeably better. This Florida State team, you could probably convince me to put them up into a natty contender.
And that's the thing. They're certainly going to be the favorites in the ACC, I would think. And I mean, to get a guy like Jared Verse back, crazy. Even Travis Hunter, I mean, he's coming back. Or not Travis.
Jordan Travis. Travis Hunter, yikes. It's some
Jordan
nice
Travis
for the Seminoles there.
Yeah, no, well, that would have been nice. But at least they, like, to get those guys back, I mean, those were the heartbeats of the team. It seems like Mike Norvell's putting his culture in place, getting what he wants going at Florida State. So I'm very much with they got a really good
I can't wait to see how they use Jaheim Bell. Like, I was so high on Jaheim Bell at South Carolina, and then they just didn't know how to use him. If they can use him the right way, he's going to be good. And I think LSU is another team that's going to be phenomenal. They have some really nice young tackles, and that's where they struggled early, is that offensive line. They just couldn't protect Jaden Daniels. But as the season went on, the offensive line got better. Guys like Will Campbell started.
How good they were able to play against Alabama is kind of where I thought, from that Florida State game to Alabama, how much improvement they were able to make is huge. And that's kind of what I'm with you. Their young guys were kind of the guys who are producing for them a lot last year. I mean, those 2 tackles, Malik Neighbors, wide out was really good. Harold Perkins is going to he might be a top 5 draft pick when he's ready to go. And then you're getting the guy Mason Smith back.
Yes.
I wish we got to see last year because he's got that. He's got the build to be an excellent player, especially at the D-line position.
Big time Brian Brazee vibes, where he's a true freshman. He dominates other grown men and then tears his ACL early year too. If he can come back and continue where he left off, Mason Smith might be one of the better interior. I included him in my 2024 NFL mock draft, first round draft, because I think that's how special a player he is. I want to see Jaden Daniels continue. I mean, he was throwing the ball from the pocket at a high level towards the end of last year. And you mentioned it, Malik Neighbors. A lot of talk went to Keyshawn Boutte. They got some good wide receivers in that room who can be playmakers, Malik Neighbors being one of them. Penn State's a really interesting team. I mean, they're in a brutal conference in the Big Ten East with Michigan, Ohio State, and I think they're on a notch below. But if Drew Lark can come in, that Penn State team was really good last year with just average quarterback play. Sean Clifford was going to be a solid starter in the Big Ten, but he wasn't really going to win you a Big Ten conference title. Drew Lark is a dude who can do that. They have a phenomenal offensive line with a really good run game. It's a perfect situation for a young, talented quarterback to come in and thrive. And their defense with Manny Diaz is loaded with talent. Abdul Carter, one of my favorite players in the country. And Kalen King.
You saw if Penn State had a quarterback, they would have been a handful last year. And in what I think is nice for and as much as people got on Sean Clifford, he never had a running game. He didn't have the offensive lines really weren't great around him in his time.
Well, besides last year.
Yeah, but everything's coming around now for the running game got pretty good last year. the offensive line was solid last year. Those two young backs are really, really good players. So it's like Sean Clifford through a lot of his career I think he looked worse than maybe he is because the team wasn't really in place around him as much. But Drew Allar's coming into a very different situation, as you saw last year. I mean, Penn State was really good last year. They lost to Michigan and Ohio State. Michigan and Ohio State are really, really good too. So I'm kind of with you. If Drew Allar can kind of come in and be the guy who we think he is and what Penn State thinks he should be, you probably see this team kick up to the next.
Yeah, the ceiling for this team and all three of these teams, Florida State, LSU, and Penn State, like I'm extremely high on, and you really could convince me to put them in that natty contender list. And two guys I want it, Storm Duck coming from UNC, like a NFL draft pick level cornerback, Devin Carter at wide receiver. They had some nice, not a ton of additions in the transfer portal, but guys who are going to impact that team right away. Next team, Washington Huskies, Michael Penix Jr., Roma Duzne, Jalen McMillan. They have probably the most exciting, outside of maybe USC, offense returning and under one of the most prolific offensive coaches in the country. I cannot wait to see how this offense runs. And that defense, they brought a lot of guys back, especially on the defensive line. I'm excited to see what this team – and we could talk about Washington, Utah, and Oregon. The Pac-12 is going to be phenomenal, and you could pick these three teams. Like, I needed these three teams. You could tell me he's going to win the Pac-12, and I probably wouldn't argue with you.
I mean, the Pac-12 has been sort of irrelevant for the past few years, but now that USC is back, and that helps the Pac-12 just in general. I mean, I know they're leaving obviously soon, but when USC is good in the Pac-12, that conference is way more exciting because I mean USC is their marquee, their big time, whatever history, all that kind of what makes college football. That's USC, and then you got Utah, Washington, Oregon, all really good teams, all returned great senior quarterbacks.
Yeah, experienced quarterbacks.
Who are like, I mean, they're the backbones of those teams, and especially Cam Rising and Penix. I mean, those two, if they're gone, those two teams are very different. But again, you're getting a fair amount back from teams that were fairly young last year. So those three teams are gonna be really tough.
And Oregon, like they lose some of those guys like Justin Flood, Noah Sewell. I'm just not convinced those were like great football players. They were flashy football players. They were exciting football players to talk about. But in terms of on-field production, like I'm not convinced that those guys are that great. And they're
not irreplaceable. I mean, you can replace guys who are making less than
Justin Jacobs coming over from Iowa. I think could be their best linebacker of last year. And then I mean Dan Lanning in his second year of the scheme. Very excited to see how all three of these and I'm just nervous that they might just eat each other up, like USC, Washington, Utah, Oregon. You could even throw in Oregon State, who we'll start talking about towards the end, a solid top 25 team. Last college football playoff contender, Clemson. Again, they've been so dominant in the ACC for so long. They've made so many college football playoff appearances. It's been a rough last 2 years with DJU, who just never really seemed to hit his stride as their starting quarterback. Cade Klubnik coming in. Will Shipley, one of the more talented running backs, and then Antonio Williams, a wide receiver that I absolutely love. They've recruited the defense side of the ball extremely well. They will have a good defense. This is a team that you can't just ignore.
I think the defense can be sneaky good just because of how young they were, especially in the secondary. And that's where they were getting torched. But then you saw kind of them come around. I mean, Toriano Pride, I think, is going to be – he's going to be a really high pick at corner because that's big, athletic, rangy, takes the ball away. He does those things that are sort of unique, if you will, at that position and sort of special. But I also think at the end of the day, if they just – their offense never really got in rhythm. It's hard to say if that was DJ's fault, if that was Brandon Streeter's fault, who I don't think was really the guy. They're bringing in Garrett Riley. They obviously got their guy at quarterback. They just got to get their offense kind of clicking again because you're right. They have the talent. I still think their offensive line, for whatever reason, doesn't play very well. I mean, they got beat up by Tennessee pretty good. And
they're still young and still they're still – I remember talking about Clemson in 2021 being an extremely young and underdeveloped offensive line. They were still seemingly kind of young in 2022, but in 2023, I could see their offensive line kind of being ready to go out and ball. And one other thing I want to mention with this Clemson team is they lose a lot of like big names on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think many of those guys played to their caliber level. Like Brian Brazee on film in 2022 was a shell of himself from what he's been. Myles Murphy, I love Myles Murphy as a draft prospect, but I don't think he was a dominant edge rusher like I thought he would be. Then Trenton Simpson, all the talent in the world, and probably will be a first-rounder, top 50 pick in the NFL draft. But again, when you watch his film, like, he's more of a projection, more of a guy that you want to see him put it together because, again, all those guys were way better in 2021 than they were in 2022.
Yeah.
All right. Getting to the dark horses, it has to start with Texas. This team could explode. I mean, the amount of talent they have on the offensive side of the ball, I get they lose Roschon Johnson. I get they lose Bijan Robinson. But Quinn Ewers, one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country, who, again, if he puts it together with a guy like Xavier Worthy, with a guy like Jordan Whittington, JT Sanders, a lot of – and their offensive line's phenomenal. It's going to be really, really good with some of those young guys they've recruited. This team could be really good. They just need Quinn Ewers and Xavier Worthy to start clicking.
That's the thing. I mean, if Quinn Ewers can take a jump and be a little just more efficient, I mean, you just feel like he wasn't completing enough of his passes at the end of the day. But when you saw him on, like, against Alabama, he looked really, really good. And so it's there. But around him, they're loaded. I think their defense is pretty good, honestly. It played way better last year. I think Jalen Ford coming back, I think he's an incredible player. So I think Texas is very much in the conversation because if their offense can really be humming, and Xavier Worthy just feels like impossible to cover because he's so fast and tracks balls well, does all those things. But I think Texas kind of belongs here too.
And I mean, I can't wait to watch this team because what if Quinn Ewers doesn't put it together? You have Arch Manning on campus now as a true freshman who could come in and play some football as well. I think Jonte Cook from the recruiting class is a guy, and Cedric Baxter at running back could be guys who impact this team immediately. And then Jalen Catalon, Gavin Holmes from the transfer portal. Like, this team got better. And then A.D. Mitchell as well. This team has a ton of talent. They just need to put it together. Next dark horse, Notre Dame. I feel like we've been saying it for years. They need a prolific quarterback. And I know some people aren't that high on Sam Hartman. I'm not one of those. Sam Hartman is an elite college football quarterback. Like, I get why the NFL draft's not drooling over him. Doesn't have a rocket arm. He's not a big dude. But at the college level, there hasn't been a more impactful player over the last couple of years than Sam Hartman for Wake Forest. He comes to Notre Dame behind a phenomenal offensive line. They should have a very good running game. And then can they just get that passing game going, especially vertically downfield, which they were just so capped with Drew Pine. Like, it was basically Michael Mayer over to the middle of the field. And if it wasn't that, they weren't really completing passes. Sam Hartman could be the most impactful transfer in college football this year.
And you're right. At the end of the day, that team's pretty good aside from just really weak quarterback play last year. I think their record, like, probably only lose 2 games or so if they just have solid play at quarterback. And Sam Hartman's going to be solid at least. He might be better than solid. We'll see, but he's going to be a far superior player.
I can't wait to see because everyone's saying Sam Hartman can't do it outside the Wake Forest, like, kind of gimmicky offense. I think he can, and I can't wait to see him make that happen at the next level at Notre Dame. The last 2 dark horses, Tennessee, you could throw them in the college football playoff contender slot. I mean, that offense with Josh Heupel, I feel like I could be quarterback and run a good offense there. It's just a brilliant design scheme. They have a guy like Brew McCoy coming back. I have question marks about Joe Milton. Again, as a Michigan fan, like, it's hard for me to put too much confidence in Joe Milton. Again, played really, really well against Clemson in that bowl game. But we've seen that as Michigan fans. We've seen the flashes of Joe Milton in terms of being consistent week in, week out. That's where it gets hard. And when you're playing SEC teams back to back to back to back, you can't have bad games. Hendon Hooker was phenomenally consistent for Tennessee. I just have question marks about Joe Milton. But if he puts it together and he's been developed by Josh Heupel, this team could be a college football playoff contender.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I wouldn't have thought last year they'd be that good, but you're starting to see a little shift in that program too, frankly, where I think they're recruiting really well. They're developing now, and guys are starting to play kind of up to their potential because Tennessee's always recruited pretty well, but there's always been frankly, it's always been their offense. They just haven't had a quarterback like that's really been really good. So that's the key. It is pretty much all on Joe Milton. If he can be really good, they're going to be really good. If not, they're obviously probably not. And
then the last team that we included as a dark horse, and They lose some guys. Like Deuce Vaughn, I think, was extremely important to the Kansas State Wildcats. But they were just so solid last year. It's kind of hard not to include them in as a dark horse when you're talking about a Big 12 that you have question marks about. Like, is Texas going to be the team? TCU, I will talk about TCU later. TCU, Oklahoma, you could make an argument that Kansas State is the best team in this conference. They're the most consistent team probably in this conference, and hard to kind of keep them out of this dark horse conversation.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they're just kind of what they are. Like, I don't know that they really have the horsepower to win a national title just because they don't recruit at that level. And at the end of the day, I think there's probably some baseline minimum which you need to be doing at recruiting to truly be that type of team. But whatever they do, they make it work. I mean, they were tough team in the Big 12 all year. And again, I don't know that they have the completeness and the.
See, I think Will Howard, if you start Will Howard just brought more to that team. And I get Adrian Martinez, and he was exciting and he was a playmaker, but Will Howard gave him more of that consistency. And I think Colin Klein has done a phenomenal job with that offense. That offense is just so clean. I'm with you. I don't know if they have the firepower to, and it's almost like the same things you were talking about with TCU. Like, they're a solid team. Do they have the firepower to kind of break through? They did. I think Kansas State possibly could. You could probably make an argument that they're just a solid top 25 team, but how consistent and how good they were all of last year, kind of hard to not include them in that dark horse conversation. Now, getting to our solid top 25 teams, and I'm going to start with my favorite team heading into the 2023 season, and that's the Oregon State Beavers. Nobody talks about this team because they're not the flashy USC. They're not the flashy offense that Washington has. They run the football. They play a lot of two tight end sets, and they play very good defense. They had horrible quarterback play. And I think this is a perfect situation for DJU to come in and say, we're not going to ask you to do too much. I think Clemson at times asked DJU to just do too much. And that offense was really poorly run, in my opinion. Oregon State's going to be able to run the football. They have some playmakers. And if DJU can be, I think DJU is a pretty substantial improvement from any quarterback they had on that roster. When you think of guys like Chance Nolan, they had a guy who was like a medical student. That's like kind of where they were with their quarterback room. DJU is a guy that I think can provide a little spark for this team in a really, really talented Pac-12.
Yeah, and I'm with you. That's just a team you don't want to play in the Pac-12.
No, you don't.
There's not a ton of glory, if you will, to be gained by beating them, but they're really, really hard to beat. They play really physical in a style I don't think most teams want to deal with.
Is it crazy to call them they could be like the Utah of the Pac-12 this year? Like that team that's just bringing the physicality when a lot of other teams want to run, spread you out and run around you. Oregon State might just be that team to run right through.
Yeah, that's what they did last year. I mean, you saw what they were able to do against Florida. They just pounded them all. Like in that bowl game, it was just, you could tell Florida didn't want a piece of what Oregon State was doing on offense, because it is a style that, again, teams don't play. That's not how defenses are built as much anymore. But if you can do it in a similar vein of how Michigan does it, like Michigan went back to an old school way that like the teams like Ohio State who are trying to beat Alabama in some of these more spread styles, they went back to the old school way of doing it, and teams just don't want to face it. They're not used to it, and that's not the players they are kind of recruiting.
Oregon State's a team that I can't wait to watch late night Pac-12. Next top 25 team, Ole Miss.
These two teams, South Carolina and Ole Miss, are cracking right on the door of becoming kind of where Tennessee was a couple of years ago, where it's like they were right on the edge of being good, but they weren't quite they weren't a shoo-in to win 10 games kind of thing. I think these two teams are sort of there, and it's going to be like a race to see who breaks through first for me.
Yeah, this Ole Miss team, I think it was a really weird move. Like you have Jackson Dart returning, and then you go get Walker Howard and Spencer Sanders. And it was a head scratcher for all of us, especially when Spencer Sanders commits to Ole Miss after Walker Howard and Jackson Dart are already in the room. I don't necessarily think Jackson Dart was elite. I think he was one of the more overrated. Like, he missed a lot of throws. He was not a very consistent quarterback. That team was good on
obviously what worked.
What'd you say?
They ran the football, and Judd can.
Yeah, they exactly. They didn't really rely on Jackson Dart. So if Walker Howard or Spencer Sanders, and you're just going to have a quarterback competition where you have three really solid quarterbacks who are all talented, see which one wins the job. They could get some massively improved quarterback play. Walker Howard is the guy to keep an eye on. They obviously do very well in the transfer portal. Bringing in a guy like Chris Marshall, like uber talented wide receiver from Texas A&M, part of that phenomenal 2022 5-star class. This team with Quinshon Judkins could be extremely good. South Carolina, in a similar vein, if we can see continued improvement from Spencer Rattler and a guy like Juice Wells, like this team, Spencer Rattler looked like a first-round quarterback the last couple games of the season. He mauled over going to the NFL draft. Comes back another year. If he can look like he did the last couple of games of the season, the South Carolina team is a team to be messing with, not a team to be messing with.
And that's true. They brought in a couple of transfers up front, which is still probably the area of that team that needs to get better. But like you saw what they were doing towards the end of the year. That's a team that's very much on the rise. I mean, how much improvement they made from the game you saw them like play against Arkansas, and then towards the end of the year. They kind of the leaps and bounds of improvements they were able to make, I think, are huge. And I think, again, like even if you're just looking at what the program's doing aside from the players, they're going in the right direction.
Yeah, agreed. And the next couple teams to round out this top 25, Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel coming back. It's just such a disappointing season from the Sooners last year. I think it was partly like Brent Venables wants to do stuff a lot different than what Lincoln Riley wanted to do. They have the talent. They've recruited extremely well. I think this Sooners team is kind of relying on some of these true freshmen coming in to be difference makers. But if they can be, they'll be good. And Wisconsin's another team you got to talk about.
Got a quarterback. They should have a pass game. That at the end of the day, if Wisconsin can throw the football at a reasonable level, they're going to be tough because the defense is going to be solid. And I do like the move for Luke Fickell because at the end of the day, that team's got to kind of re-energize themselves. And what Paul Chris was able to do was like good, and it got him to a good place, but they're never going to really be knocking on the door winning Big Tens the way that Paul Chris was kind of running that program. And Luke Fickell's going to bring in more how Ohio State and in the big Penn State, those programs run themselves, where they are aggressively recruiting everywhere in the country. It's not just like find our guys like 3-star players and develop them. He's going to bring them into the modern era. And that's at the end of the day, this Wisconsin team needs to do that.
I can't wait to because Luke Fick was like, yeah, we're still going to run the football. You still have one of the best running backs in the country with Braylon Allen. You still have phenomenal offensive linemen up front. And then Phil Long goes calling the offense, which is like he's going to spread you out and lean on Tanner Mordecai, who I think was a phenomenal get in the transfer portal. Because you have some young quarterbacks that you're excited about, but guys who not necessarily proven yet. Tanner Mordecai is going to be the dude this year. He's one of the more productive quarterbacks returning in college football. And then the future of this team is extremely exciting.
Now you got kind of some talent at wideout. I mean, Shamar DK, I think, is a guy who, if you give him a chance with a real passing attack, I think he's going to be really good. He makes contested catches, big physical wideout. You're adding CJ Williams and also the guy from Oklahoma State, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So you're bringing in a passing attack that I think can now complement what they do with Braylon Allen, give him a little more space. And the offense can get moving a little bit and just be a little more balanced. They're going to be really, really good.
That's the most exciting thing I'm willing to see is looking at Wisconsin running the football with Braylon Allen, not into 8-man boxes. Because that's what they just walk in the safety. You had a loaded box and you still want to run the football. And Braylon Allen would make it happen because he's a dog. But now he's going to see a lot more 2-high safeties, a lot lighter of boxes because you got to respect the passing game of Phil Longo and Tanner Mordecai. And Braylon Allen might be able to eat. TCU coming in, and I feel like an idiot disrespecting TCU, and they took all that disrespect and kept winning. And we were not one of those who were disrespecting. At some point, we were just like, they keep winning football games. They're a very good team. They lose kind of their heartbeat and heart and soul of their team in Max Duggan. They lose a lot of guys who are really, really good. Kendra Miller was a phenomenal running back. Quentin Johnson, Steve Avila, Alan Ali up front. And then on the defense side of the ball, Dylan Horton, Travius Hodges-Tomlinson at cornerback. They just lose so much. Chandler Morris, I'm excited to see run this offense. But I just, from a talent roster standpoint, I think they just lost a little too much to be that top 10 team that we saw in that magical 2022 season. Although
they did do a pretty good job in the transfer portal.
Yes.
It's not like they took a handful of guys from Alabama.
Tommy Brockmeyer, JoJo Earl, yeah.
Exactly. And then, but at the end of the day, I still like, I'm not that as good as they were last year. I still think to put them back up after losing that much into like that contender dark horse tier, I think we need to see a couple more years of Sonny Dykes running a team that is year in and year out good.
Yes.
We've obviously seen teams like flash for their brief moments and then fall back down. If Sonny Dykes can start doing it consistently, being a 10-win team in the Big 12, I'd be very willing to like, okay, he loses some guys and just assume it's going to reload like Alabama, like Georgia, like Ohio State. But he's just, you haven't seen that yet with this team. So I think they need to prove it a little more than some of these other squads.
All right, rounding out our top 25, we got UNC, Arkansas, and UTSA. UNC is a team that they very similar to USC. Like it's Drake May or bust, and they lose their offensive coordinator in Phil Longo. But Drake May is still a dog. This offense is still going to be good. Is the defense going to be mediocre? I mean, that was one of the worst Power 5 defenses we've seen. And so if they can get solid on defense, they're still a solid top 25 team, potentially a contender in the ACC. Arkansas bringing back KJ Jefferson for another year is absolutely massive. I think they'll just be about as solid as they've been the last couple of years, unless KJ Jefferson can be that elite Heisman guy that some people think he can be. And then rounding out the top 25, UTSA, Frank Harris coming back. Jeff Traylor's done a phenomenal job with this program. And I mean, the last 2 years, you're always seeing them in the top 25. I think you're going to see a similar season from them this year. They're not going to be a contender for the college football playoffs. I don't think they're a deep enough team. But when you have a quarterback who at that level of competition is just the best player on the field, you can do some special things.
Yeah, no, I mean, UTSA is a team, again, you just don't see a ton of because they're not on the premier games and whatnot. But at the end of the day, when you have a guy of Frank Harris's caliber, it's hard to count them out. Just like that's the only reason UNC's on this list too, is like they're not an overall great team, I don't think, but they do have a great Heisman level quarterback.
And if you're looking for one more non-Power 5 team that you could throw into that discussion, it's Tulane. I mean, they had a phenomenal finish to the season. They lose a lot of guys, but Michael Pratt's coming back. And again, similar conversation you had with Frank Harris. Michael Pratt is that dude for Tulane. All right, let's get into maybe the most exciting part of this. Some of the teams to watch that obviously have a lot of potential, but it's just hard to include them in the top 25 after what you saw in 2022. Let's start with the Miami Hurricanes, a team that is very talented and just had an extremely disappointing 2022 season.
And I'm not sure what the catalyst is going to be for them to be that much better this year.
Me neither.
I mean, you get rid of both coordinators now and not get
which is a good thing, which I think is a good thing.
That's true. That's probably a good thing. They weren't doing it, but it's hard for me to convince me. I think they did an okay job in the transfer portal. Javian Cohen certainly matters. In what they're doing now is recruiting, but like, are they going to have enough guys from that freshman class coming in and producing? Otherwise, I just don't know how they're going to be that much better. It's not. I don't know what they've done that makes me think this is going to be different. Because
my thing is, it's a talented roster, and if these coordinators can come in and be the catalyst that we're talking about, I think it could be a special team, and not a special team, but I think it's a team that's a solid ACC team. But again, it's hard to include them in the top 25 after what you saw in 2022. Texas A&M, another team that's uber talented, but lost a lot of those talented freshmen from last year. Connor Wigman, can he take that step at the wide receiver position? Evan Stewart, I think, or at that quarterback spot. Evan Stewart is one of the best wide receivers in the country. This team could be good. Again, they're a team that needs to put it together.
I'm interested to see if Bobby Petrino can come in and make it happen, because he, as much as like you don't necessarily trust him to be your head coach because he's got a litany of things he's done his career, but he does know how to run an offense. You think back to like those Darren McFadden years at Arkansas and some of the things he was able to do at Louisville on the offensive side. Like, he knows what he's doing coaching offense. So him coming in, hopefully getting more control, because at the end of the day, that offense never looked like it had any creativity or any. they didn't put their players in a great position to succeed, I guess, at the end of the day.
And I've fallen for this. Like we would always include Jimbo Fisher as like a top 7, top 5 coach in college football. We might have just been wrong about that.
Might have just been 1 year
in terms of his offensive like chops. I think he was really relying on a guy like Jameis Winston to like make him his money. Like when you have an elite quarterback like that at the college football level, whatever you call an offense is going to work. When he hasn't had an elite quarterback, like these offenses have been not great, and he's been the play caller. I think the biggest thing for this Texas A&M team is he's ideally relinquishing and kind of letting Petrino run with this offense because that offense needs some work. Florida Gators, another team that's really talented. The quarterback situation
at the end of the day, like what they're doing recruiting wise is really good, and I think they're building. But this year, I don't think it's going to be a year where the Gators are really competing for an SEC.
No, and they just missed in the train, like in a kind of inexcusable way. Like you lose out on Jaden Rashada, and then you just don't get a transfer quarterback outside.
I felt like there were good quarterbacks to be had too.
I know, and they couldn't. Like, how are you not getting like a Devin Leary?
Graham
yeah, I don't know. It was bad. All right, last 2 teams, and these are teams that we just wanted to touch on. Nebraska with Matt Rule coming in. Again, we said it last year. This team is talented. It has the bones to be a top 25 team. They just got to put it together. And I trust Matt Rule to do it. He's been a dude that has won everywhere he's gone. And then finally, Coach Prime in the Colorado Buffalo is probably the best storyline in 2023.
And again, like with Colorado and Nebraska, you certainly don't really know what you're going to be getting, but at least you have something that gets you really fired up. And like, we might be able to turn this ship around, if you will, in both cases. And that's just so exciting. If you're a college football fan of either of those teams, like that's all you can ask for is that your administration goes out and makes an effort to get back to winning national titles. And I think that's what both schools did with those hires.
No, I think Colorado is a good team, but you look at this schedule, and it's really tough. We already talked about the Pac-12 being really good, and then they add TCU on the road and Nebraska at home. Like that is not an easy out-of-conference schedule. And then again, Oregon, USC. Like there's a world where they're 1-4 in their first 4, like in their first 5 games. I don't necessarily think that, but if this group of transfers and group of new faces doesn't come together immediately, like it could get off to a rocky start. And then again, Arizona State, Stanford, winnable games, UCLA, winnable games, and then down the stretch, Oregon State and Utah. Like, this is a very hard pack
schedule.
It's a hard pack, and they don't have the cakewalks early in the season to get those new names and new faces kind of acclimated to the system. So we'll see how this works. Again, that's our top 25 plus a couple guys that we just wanted to talk about. Again, if you guys enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.